I'm going to start off with talking about the Ionians. The Ionians are a group that was very much believed that the physical world was real. But what they were interested in, which is kind of an interesting idea, is they believed that at its core, all of reality had a basic building block. The idea would be, I can start with sort of a story for my own. I remember as a kid walking along the sidewalk and looking down at it and noticing, within a concrete sidewalk that there were little pebbles or little pieces that looked like rocks within it. And I suddenly realized that even though this thing that looks like one large piece of stone, one large piece of concrete, is actually a lot of little pieces of rock that have somehow become melded together right into that. And that, you could eventually break them free and then maybe make something different with them, which is basically exactly what concrete was. So, for me to have made that observance as a child was perhaps a little bit, I don't think I had a complete realization, but that was basically the idea. And that's essentially what they're doing, is that they were looking to say, that all of reality has these little building blocks that, at its core, they're the same block, and we can just build different things out of it. And as an example of this, one of the things I brought here is they call matter, the material world, the physical stuff that we live in, they call that, it comes from a Greek word for lumber. And the idea is that, that there's some sort of a lumber that builds up the world. And I brought here, as an example, my son's blocks. I call them my son's blocks, as if my son's, it's really theirs. Really, they're my blocks. I just let them play with them sometimes. Not very often, really. They try to destroy the stuff I build. They go away. A lot of time out comes out of that. Because, they're ruining what Daddy's trying to do. And that's not good. And, but the case is, sometimes I'll build stuff with these, and, maybe I'll build maybe, I don't know what this is. This is a little, it's got a window here. It's a little restaurant or something. And then I might rebuild it. And I sometimes will do this. My son finds this very funny lately. I will do this with it. Sorry. Yes, you're going to have to sit through me building stuff. I'll make something like this, and I'll say it's my fishing pole, and I'll pretend like I'm trying to catch him with my fishing pole, something like that. And he's 3 and 1. They're 3 and 1. So, those are kinds of things I'll do. But what happens is, the idea of why I'm showing you this is, I use the exact same blocks to do both of these. Now I have a tunnel, whereas before I had a building, and then I had a fishing pole. But it was all using the same blocks, the same lumber. And so in the same way, the early Greeks believed that if you got down to its core, all of physical reality had these little building blocks, these little blocks that sometimes could get built into people, sometimes they got built into rocks, sometimes they got built into chairs or desks or houses or cars. But, whatever it was, it was all the same piece at its core. And they also were known as atomists, which means that they believed the word atom, which is, you have an atomic bomb or a molecule, that's an atom, means indivisible in the Greek. And the idea from atom, or atomism, is that there was a belief that there was an indivisible building block, some piece that at its core was the exact same, and you couldn't get any smaller, that this was the basic building block. And so that's what they were searching for, is they want to know, what is this building block? So what they did is they believed that, everything could come from it. And one of the most famous was a guy named Thales. And Thales said all is water. And what Thales was saying was Thales wasn't trying to tell you that, everything is essentially like a frozen, piece of water. I could wring out things and we'd get water. What he was suggesting was water was a basic building block. For lack of any better name, he'll call it water. And Empedocles was a follower or later developer of this idea. But Thales, what he basically was saying was that, if you take water, if I take a plant, and I get a plant, and I put it in a pot, and I put a seed in there. I don't put a plant, I just put a seed. And I water that, and, give it light and heat and everything and sun. Eventually, the plant will grow into a huge thing. And at the end of the season, or whenever I decide I'm done with the plant, I can take it out, I can shake all the dirt, get all the dirt off the roots, and I can dry that dirt back out, And what you'll find is you have the exact same amount of dirt when you started as afterwards. But I have this huge plant, and I can weigh that plant. Maybe the plant weighs 100 pounds, and I got 3 pounds of dirt still. So somehow, the only thing that I added, other than heat and sunlight, was water. And somehow that water went in and rebuilt as a plant. And then eventually, the plant gets eaten by animals. And then somehow that food and that water they drink becomes the cow, or becomes the dog, or becomes this. And then eventually, those animals get slaughtered and eaten, or they die and they become organic matter, or they become shoes, like a cow might become leather. And so everything at some way can be traced back to water. Somehow it becomes a plant, somehow it becomes an animal, somehow it becomes my shoes, somehow it becomes this. Plants decay, they become oil, oil fuels my car, etc., etc. And so there's building block is water. It's just somehow moving from piece to piece. And so at the core, there's this little piece that can change, and it's essentially a formless, just a physical piece that gets built into different objects. Now, eventually, people were happy with that, they liked that, but there was a little bit of a thought that maybe they needed more than just water, and so there were some additions, and you have Empedocles, who said there were 4 basic forms, and most of you know this through something like Captain Planet. The younger members of this class know it, where it's like Earth, Wind, Air, Fire combined to create Captain Planet. Okay, and so the idea there is, that was like a cartoon that was on basically when I was too old for cartoons. I saw it a few times, but it was sort of late in my cartoon period. Before they started making cartoons specifically for adults, but like Adult Swim or whatever. But so what happens is Empedocles comes along and he says, I don't know if water is enough. And so he basically says there are 4 basic building blocks. There's water, there's earth, there's fire, and there's air. And so the idea here is instead of having one type of block, everything is just this block that gets building everything. There's another type, and then, there's another type, and then there's yet another type, and that these 4 interchangeably become different things. And the idea is that at its basic level, there's earth, it's the hardest, and then there's water, which is a little lighter, there's air, which is above it, and fire, which exists up in the heavens. Fire is always constantly trying to go up. Flames always jump higher and higher. And so the idea there is that, those are your 4 basic building blocks, and that they make up all of reality. Now, they combine and they break apart, and there's, this is where it gets a little weird. There's like a power of love and the power of strife that's constantly pushing them together. Love and strife is constantly pulling them apart. And so there's this constant process of building. But the basic idea, and without having to go into all that in great detail, is the idea that, if you have, like, for example, here's my phone or something, that this has like a rubber casing. The rubber is a lot lighter than, say, the plastic box, the Otter box I have it in, because I have to get the strongest possible box for my phone because I'm very clumsy. And, perhaps the rubber outer part is, 30% water and 40% air, 10% fire, and 10% earth, whereas the plastic's 60% earth. The idea is that each of these combine in different ways and get built in different ways to create these different objects, and they're constantly going and going. But when you get done with it, you could burn it, you could liquefy it, you could eat it, and that somehow those blocks would, through some process, break down and then become another thing through that. And that's essentially where they were doing this. They had this idea that at its core, everything is something small, a basic building block. And to a certain degree, we still have that view that, at its core, all of physical reality is, in fact, some sort of basic building block, that there are atoms, that there are little molecules that build up everything. We now have a more complex idea of that, but, they, without ever having had a microscope or that level of understanding, were at least aware that, things could transform from one physical object to another physical object through some process. And so they realized that there was something that made them physical and was able to then manipulate and become other parts.